I've got a story you might be interested in. This happened to me a couple years back. It was early springtime in our small Arizona town. I was a college kid, just graduated, and entirely unsure of what's next. I was staying with my cousins for the summer until I figured something else out. The old house had a charm of its own. There was a lot of history there, but that's not what I'm writing in about. That's a whole nother story. Let me paint you a picture of life in Arizona. It's not all husky cowboy romance with the wind rustling through long dried grass. It's long, hot days that turn you into a creature with the speed and ambition of a slug. It was impossible to do anything outdoors after about 10 a.m. The sunrises and sunsets around here were pretty killer though. It was like an artist painted them across the sky every night. My days were mostly uneventful. I'd help my cousin with the house chores, bum around town, or just go for long walks and admire the landscape. I was living a quiet life. It gave me the time I needed to think about my next phase of life. But then things started to get strange. I would take walks around the property just about every night at dusk. It became a sort of ritual for me. Also, it was the only time of day I could go for a walk without melting into a puddle on the ground. On one of my walks, I noticed this strange figure lurking on the horizon line. At first, I thought maybe I was just hallucinating it. Maybe I had been out in the heat too long. But then I saw it again the next night, and there was more than just the one. They looked like birds from a distance. Large birds, but birds nonetheless. We had eagles, vultures, and condors out here, so I didn't think too much of it. The first good look I got of the creature was something I would never forget. The sun had just sunk past the horizon, leaving streaks of orange that melded into a bluish purple. I remember thinking that Arizona must have the best sunsets in the world. I was watering the peepal tree near the edge of the property. It had been drier than usual that week, and I figured the tree could use all the help it could get. Suddenly, an ominous shadow flickered across the sky, like something large had passed over the sun. I looked up from the water can in time to catch a hint of a large figure disappearing behind a rocky outcrop beyond the property. Whatever it was big. I scanned the horizon, but everything was silent except. I went back to my business with the tree, and when I went to turn around, the creature was sitting out in the open, watching me. It was this strange reptilian figure with large gangly limbs. Large black talons extended from its hands and feet. It had wings like a bird, feathers included. However, its body was covered entirely in scales, except for the end of the tail, which had a plume of feathers attached to it. The creature was the color of the sand and stones around it. If I hadn't seen it move, I might not have even noticed it was there. It was near perfect camouflage, except for the eyes. It had these yellow snake-like predatory eyes. That was the only one I saw up close, but I ran into others during my summer there. Sometimes there would be only one out, but more often than not, there were 3 or 4 dotted around the landscape. To find them, you really had to look. I didn't understand why they were there, then seemed intent on watching me whenever I came out into the yard in the evening. My cousins had lived at that house for ages, and never once had they mentioned anything remotely close to this. I didn't know what they were, maybe some new bird species? But to me, they looked like dinosaurs. I know that sounds crazy, but they were covered in scales and had distinctly lizard-like heads. I don't have any other theories that make a bit of sense. Maybe the Arizona desert held secrets deeper than we'd like to think. But this was all speculation on my end, no hard evidence. I decided one day that I would take a camera out there with me. I had been seeing them just about every night, so I had a good chance of catching a photograph. I took my evening walk, and when I got to the edge of the property, I could see one of them sitting on a rock formation. Despite my better judgment, I decided to approach the creature. It didn't take its eyes off me as I slowly made my way towards it. All I wanted was a photo. That was it. I just wanted some definite proof that I wasn't insane. But then, just as I got within range, the creature took flight and swooped over my head like it was dive bombing me. I instinctively covered my head, but it flew off without contact. I didn't see the creatures again for nearly 2 weeks. I don't know how to say this without sounding weird, but I felt bad that I disturbed the creature, that I upset it when it wasn't doing anything at all to me. They finally began to return to their regular places and let them be. It was a strange dynamic, but they didn't seem to want to hurt anyone, so I figured we could just exist together as we were. After all, the desert is big enough for all of us. It happened during one of my graveyard shifts at the museum. It's an older building, smack in the heart of Manhattan. It was originally built sometime in the 1800s. They've done a lot to it since then, but the bones are original. I'm the night security guard. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays my bills, and I've come to enjoy the quiet times of the night. It's kind of cool the way the artifacts stand frozen in time under the exhibit lights. Almost peaceful in a way. I worked the 10 to 6 shift. Every night was pretty much the same. I made my rounds through the same hallways, same exhibits, same still lifes. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening ever. That is, until one night. It was a normal Wednesday for me. I just finished my 4th cup of coffee for the night. I had adjusted to the night shift, but I still needed coffee to keep me up on those quiet nights. As I walked through the darkened hallways, flashlight in hand, I noticed something strange. The door to the Mesozoic exhibit was ajar. The exhibit was one of the newer additions to the museum, a sprawling showcase of fossilized creatures from the prehistoric era. It was usually tightly sealed off when I arrived. The afternoon staff always shut everything down for the day before they left. But that night, the door was open just a crack. I hesitated at first, but duty called. More scared of my boss than a potential ghost, I approached the entrance, praying that a clumsy cleaner had just forgotten to close the door. I nudged it open with my boot, the creak of the rusty hinges echoing down the corridor. As I stepped inside, my flashlight fell on a sight that made my blood run cold. The center exhibit, a massive T-Rex skeleton, was vandalized. Its jawbone had been forcefully removed, scattered bone fragments lying far and wide. I just stood there in shock at first, not knowing what to think. Not only was it an irreplaceable artifact, but it was damn heavy. It would take at least a couple of people to do this. And there was no one else here. I remember my heart racing, thumping fast in my chest as I ventured further into the exhibit. I reached into my pocket for my walkie-talkie. I intended to inform my partner on the lower floor about the weird situation. I was interrupted by a strange, metallic click. It was repetitive, like chattering teeth. Chills ran down my spine and I froze in my tracks. I scanned the room with my flashlight. The sound seemed to be coming from this one dark corner, but I couldn't see anything there, at least not at first. I was pretty frightened at that point. I called out and asked, "Who's there?" but received no answer. I swallowed my fear, tightened my grip on my flashlight, and ventured deeper into the exhibit to see what I could find. I was never really creeped out by the museum, but the light from above was casting long shadows, making the fossils seem like they were coming back to life. The clicking sound suddenly intensified. It was like someone was typing furiously on one of those old-fashioned typewriters. My breath hitched. There was something in the room with me. I was hoping it was maybe some strange piece of tech for the exhibit that was malfunctioning, but something deep inside me knew that it wasn't. There was something in here and I was pretty sure it was dangerous. I was frozen in sheer terror. This wasn't worth it. I liked my job well enough, but I wasn't about to get into a confrontation here on my own. I told myself that all I had to do was to get through the exhibit hall and to the emergency exit. I could call for backup and everything would be fine, but I needed to get out of there first. I pushed myself flat against the wall, trying to blend into the shadows. That's when my companion finally made an appearance. It stepped out of the shadows and into the beam of my flashlight. I'd like to say I didn't scream, but fear makes liars of us all. Its appearance was somehow both familiar and alien at the same time. It was bipedal and roughly the same size as a man, but there was nothing human about the way the creature moved. The limbs were incredibly long, bending in odd places. It appeared like it could walk, but it was hunched over and crawling instead. The creature was disturbingly skinny, almost skeletal, with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dark. Eyes as large and dark as the blackest night stared back at me, void of any warmth or human understanding. The clicking noises were coming from its mouth. I won't lie. I took one look and I ran. All that mattered to me was creating distance between myself and that thing. The flashlight dropped from my grasp, plunging the room into darkness. I could hear the creature in pursuit, its clicking growing louder, echoing around the exhibit. Running blindly in the dark, I crashed into displays and stumbled over debris, but I didn't stop. I knew the museum layout by heart, but in sheer panic, everything felt alien. After a grueling eternity, I felt the cold metal door of the fire exit. Pushing through it, I was out in the open, the cold night air stinging my lungs. As the sun rose, I found myself still sitting on the sidewalk, shocked. The bizarre encounter had left me speechless. I had my phone and my radio on me, but I still hadn't called anyone. What would I even say? Maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing. The vandalized exhibit was evidence enough that it was real. Something did that. There was no way around it. But my brain was unwilling to accept it. Returning to work the next night felt like a cruel joke. The fear was still fresh. I surprised myself that I even went back. I was haunted by the memory of the creature. What was it doing in the museum that night? How did it get there? What did it want? And more importantly, where on earth did it go? This happened some time back, during one of my escapades around Detroit's ruins. I have a fascination for abandoned and derelict spaces that have fallen into ruin. I know it sounds a little strange, but it's becoming a pretty popular hobby. Me personally, I'm an amateur photographer, and there's just something special about these old places that makes for good photos. There was an old factory that I had been to a couple of times. It was massive in size and oozing with history, just waiting to be dredged up. I had my bag loaded with my camera equipment, spare batteries, a flashlight, and some water. I wanted to get there in the evening to catch the light coming through the broken windows. Natural light is always best, at least in my experience. The place had an eerie vibe to it, and I hoped to capture that with my camera. So there I was, standing perched at the door, the rusty broken padlocks all old and battered. The things we do for art, I thought to myself before stepping across the threshold. I won't lie, navigating through the hollow carcass of the factory was creepy. The silence broken only by distant drips of water from the leaking ceiling. The cavernous space was a maze, easy to get turned around. I paused every now and then, snapping pictures of the broken down machinery and the crumbling structure of the building. Vines had migrated their way inside through broken windows. It was a goldmine for a photographer. I ended up wandering deeper into the factor than I had before. Normally, I stuck around the entrance. The light was easier to work with there, but something called me elsewhere. I can't explain it really. I just felt this pull towards the interior of the building. And, like an idiot, I followed it. It would be a mistake I would regret for the rest of my life. I was about to discover that there are far more sinister things in our world than I care to know about. That strange feeling pulled me toward the basement. I went down the empty stairwell, my footfalls echoing through the entire building. It was unsettlingly quiet. When I reached the ground floor, the air seemed charged. It was heavier. The best I can describe it is like that feeling you get when there's static electricity, like you're about to get shocked. I remember turning around a couple of times, trying to find a reason the air around me might feel so strange. And then, out of nowhere, I was hit with the most god-awful smell. It was unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. Vile doesn't even come close to describing it. It was the smell of something long dead and left out to rot. It set off a rush of unease in me. I should have backed out then. I told myself it was probably an animal that died down here. After all, most of the windows in the factory were broken, and animals tend to take advantage of places like this. So I pressed forward, mustering every ounce of bravado I had left. I came to a room that was even more unsettling than anything I had seen in the building so far. Maybe it was the eerie silence, or maybe it was that smell, but something was definitely wrong. It was a smaller space than some of the other expansive rooms in the factory. There was an empty elevator shaft at the far end that just seemed to swallow up the darkness. It was here where I met the beast. I first heard faint whispers floating around me, as if coming from the very walls of the factory. The whispers were followed by light footsteps. I was skeptical. I tried to find some semblance of logic, but there was no one else in here. I scanned the room, but I didn't see anything at first. I had my flashlight out, trying to light as much of the room as I could. In the corner, I saw what I initially mistook as a shadow towering over me. When my flashlight beam hit it directly, I was horrified. It was like nothing I had ever seen before or hoped to see again. The creature darted away into the enveloping darkness, but not before I caught sight of it. It had to have been around 8 to 9 feet tall. It had the body of a deer or an elk. I'm not quite sure. It was skeletal, with rotting skin barely clinging onto its bony frame. I was certain this horrible beast was the source of the smell. Its head was the most terrifying part. It was a bare skull, skinless with no trace of muscle or hide. It had no eyes that I could see, only empty sockets, but there was some kind of light glowing from within. I won't lie to you, I wasn't brave. Despite my curiosity, I ran. I ran all the way up the stairs, and before I knew it, I had burst out of the derelict factory and into the cold night air. The rest of the night was a blur. I somehow made it back to my car and then home, but I don't remember any of it. I couldn't help but replay the chilling encounter over and over in my mind, pinching myself to ensure it wasn't some sleep-deprived hallucination. I put a pause on my abandoned explorations for a while after that, and I certainly don't go out after dark anymore. It's funny. You know, I've heard of these types of creatures living out in the forest and remote wilderness areas, but not here in the city. Hopefully it was just a lone incident, but who knows, maybe they are moving into urban environments too. I've been firefighting for over a decade. There's a lot of highs and lows on the job, but this time, I faced down something I still can't explain. We got a call about a wildfire flaring up on the outskirts of Sacramento. I remember it vividly. It was August, the peak of California's fire season. It's always about moving fast in these situations, so we packed up quick and sped off toward the blaze. What gets to you in this job isn't just the risk or the fear of uncertainty. It's the knowledge that you're battling with a force you can't always win. Every fire is a challenge. It was getting dark when we arrived at the fire's edge. The glow from the flames lit up the sky, and I could hear the roar of the blaze that sounded like an angered beast. My team and I, 8 of us in all, quickly unpacked our gear, set up a perimeter, and got to work. Our goal was to limit the damage if possible, and try and prevent it from spreading to residential areas. For hours, we worked on containment. Strenuous, sweaty work, moving with whatever the fire decided to do. I was tired, I'll admit that, almost near exhausted, but what I'm about to tell you is solid truth. I spotted something odd within the fire, something unsettling. There was this strange shape, a dark, obscure figure nestled stark between the flickering flames. It looked almost human. The odd part was, the fire seemed to steer clear of it, leaving the figure untouched by the flames surrounding it. Its form was too inconstant to identify it, sorta shifting and distorting in the erratic flashes of light and shadows. It stood there and watched us, like it was curious or something. Its body was too dark to see any distinguishable characteristics, but I could see its eyes well enough. They were bright red, even redder than the flames burning around it. The outline of it appeared hazy, like it was covered in some type of fur or similar organic materials. The fact that it didn't catch fire was unfathomable to me. It did not appear to be affected by the heat nor the smoke. Whatever this thing was, it was completely unnatural. A shiver ran down my spine, and I could feel an almost oppressive wave of dread wash over me. I quickly alerted the rest of my team, but as their flashlights swept across the place where I'd seen the creature, it seemed to have disappeared. Yet, the unshakable feeling of being observed lingered. We didn't have time to stop and talk about it. We carried on with our duties. It was no time to get swayed by the unknown, as there were homes and lives on the line. But amidst all the chaos and fear, I couldn't shake off that feeling of unease. I'm certain that pair of seemingly glowing eyes are going to haunt me until the day I die. It just seemed so unbelievable. We fought the blaze for what seemed like hours more, before we were finally able to contain it. The air turned a misty gray as the last of the smoke began to clear. As we moved about, checking for any potential flare-ups, I found myself glancing towards the direction where I'd observed the strange figure now and then, half expecting it to reappear. It was sometime near dawn, and gratefully, I was exhausted. The fire was contained successfully, and we were finally allowed some respite. As I bedded down, taking a moment's peace before the ash cleanup in the morning, my mind wasn't on the hard-won victory of man over nature, but on the thing in the flames. What was it? What did it want? And how on earth was it immune to fire like that? In the days that followed, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling the encounter had ignited. I began to question everything. Was the creature I saw responsible for the wildfire? Or was it just watching and waiting like the rest of us? I decided that I had to investigate. Doing some research, I came across the folklore of the Mothman's curse and its ties to catastrophic events. The creature was said to stand 6 feet tall, with large wings folded against its back. And get this, it has red glowing eyes. Those are its only descriptors. Reading these accounts felt eerily familiar. As of today, it's been a year and a half since that day, and I've not faced another creature like that. I've thought about it plenty though, turned it over in my head about 100 times. Sometimes I attribute the entire episode to heat, fatigue, and stress. That's a lot easier than believing something like, the Mothman is out there in our world with us. I don't tell this story too often. I've gotten more than a little judgment in the past. I know how outrageous it sounds, but I swear it's the truth. There was a creature out there that day in the middle of the flames. I'm hoping that maybe you or one of your listeners might have answers for me. Did I cross paths with the Mothman that day? And why was the creature in the middle of a raging wildfire? And why was it immune to the fire? I figure if anyone knows, it might be you. It's strange. I almost hope to see the creature again someday. I don't want to relive the fear it brought out of me, but I just want to know that I'm not crazy. That I did in fact see what I saw that day. I'm from this little middle-of-nowhere Midwestern town. Nights are always quiet and peaceful around here. There's almost no light pollution. The stars seem to light up the whole sky on clear nights. Not much interesting happens around here. Well, not usually. I probably wouldn't have even known it existed. But I've got this unhealthy love for roasted corn chips that gets me out of the house at all hours. Yeah, I know, but everybody has their vice. I ended up heading to the only convenience store that stayed open past 10. I always walked on my late-night snack runs. It wasn't too far away, plus I felt like the exercise offset the junk food I was on my way to get. I strolled through the quiet streets. The hum of the single functioning street lamp was the only thing breaking the peaceful silence. Harry, who works the night shift at the station, is kind of a staple in our town. He was a chatty guy. I enjoyed our little talks whenever I headed to the store after dark. When I got to the store, Harry was behind the counter, and as usual, he welcomed me with a quip about my unhealthy eating habits. I finished my purchase and made my way out. Little did I know, that night was about to take a wild turn. I started my walk back. Everything was as it should be. But then, just as I was about halfway back, there was this weird sensation in the air, like when you feel someone's looking at you. But when you turn around, there's no one there. I looked around, but everything was just as quiet and peaceful as ever. Chalking it up to my overactive imagination, I continued my journey home. There's this small park on my route back that lends a bit of a shortcut. The path is narrow and dimly lit, but it shaves a couple of minutes off my walk, and I was eager to get home. I ignored the eerie feeling from earlier and set off down the path. As the initial brightness of the street lamps faded away, my footsteps seemed to grow louder. I had barely even stepped onto the path when I heard a low, throaty growl coming somewhere from the trees around me. It was very faint. I couldn't tell just how far away it was. If I wasn't so focused on the eerie silence, I might have missed it. I don't know if I can accurately describe how strange it felt there. I remember a chill shooting down my spine and all the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Now, I'm not easily frightened, but there was something very much wrong about that noise. It didn't sound like a dog or a coyote, or even a bear. It was different somehow. Something about the situation reeked of danger and instinctively told me to turn and run. I looked around again. I just knew something strange was going on, and I wasn't going to shrug it off this time. And then, there it was. A figure looming between the trees. It was some distance away, but I could still tell that it was huge. It was difficult to make out the identity of the creature, but it seemed to be shaped like a dog or a wolf. But there was one thing in particular that made me think I was dealing with something otherworldly. The eyes. It had these glowing yellow eyes. They looked like two candles burning in the woods. It stood for a moment just watching me. Neither of us moved for the longest time. And then it rose, stood right up on its hind legs. It was definitely the shape of a dog. I could tell that now. But it seemed to have the ability to stand up like a bear, or for that matter, a human. Its body was broad and muscular. There was a clear, dark outline of thick fur covering its beastly stature. It took a few steps forward and showed itself in the moonlight. It had the head of a dog with an elongated muzzle and an angular face. The muzzle was thin and tapered, much like a wolf. But there was this menacing, human-like consciousness in its eyes that shook me straight to my core. It was a sight I won't soon forget. There was a dank, musty smell that accompanied the creature. There was a hint of something rotten, but I wasn't quite sure exactly where it was coming from. I won't lie, I was scared. I felt it deep in my gut, and in the trembling of my limbs and the cold sweat on my skin. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't give chase. It didn't appear to be coming any closer. The creature dropped down to all fours again. It looked so much like a wolf when it was on the ground. I wasn't sure what I was even looking at. I slowly walked away, never turning my back on the creature. The journey home was a blur. I watched the creature fade into the distance, and I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I didn't relax until I was safe within the confines of my living room, and the door was locked and bolted. As for the creature, I don't know what became of it. Last I saw of it, it was standing alone in the woods, and it wasn't about to go back there looking for it. I've spent quite a bit of time questioning what I saw, thinking maybe it was some sort of sick joke, or maybe my mind had tricked me, and it wasn't real at all. But one thing was certain. My quiet, boring night walks to Old Harry's convenience store would never be the same after that. It took me a while before I felt safe enough to venture on another late-night snack run, and when it did, you can be sure I stuck to the main drags. No more shortcuts through the park for me. Now, I'm not sure if the creature was just passing through, or if it lives out here. I'm not sure I want to know. But on the off chance that it does live here, it doesn't seem to be causing anyone any trouble, so I guess I'll leave it at that.